I do.
Oh, you do have it? I have one in the car, but that's okay. Thank you.
Temple Sholom.
Oh, ignite.
Okay, so we're streaming now. If you want to tell anybody that it's online now.
Okay,
I need clear ribbons.
yeah, how many do we need?
We need 4.
Oh.
Remember we talked about 3.
Yeah, I was going to say, where's their ETA?
Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Do you think we could work that out so I can get some?
Oh,
Yeah,
there's-
I'll
that's
take
one.
another look.
And we'll get some on order.
Do you know how many times?
It was flowing in. Then one, but never all in the same color. There was a bad and then. Okay, do you want the colors?
No, we're just going to do everybody.
Yeah, maybe.
Are you going to do a 7 stop, right?
I'm doing a funeral. I can't talk right now. Otherwise, my son will keep texting me from his Jewish history class asking me to answer questions.
Oh, no. Always got Google, isn't he?
Just go straight on?
Yeah.
Or come around the other
And
side?
come around the other side.
So this is the feed in here.
Head is there.
At the top?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, we're in good. So we can come around, we can go around the tree. And
Yeah, yeah. You guys found it okay?
Oh, yeah. I'm kind of like, came from Westminster, so I just have to go down the King George.
Gorgeous day.
Yeah.
It's gonna be nice tomorrow too, and then we'll go back.
Yeah.
Maybe
Oh, really?
Sunday should be okay.
I thought it was like nice all the way through.
We
It depends what weather service you look at. Mine says it's gonna rain next week.
Monday is like rain. But tomorrow's supposed to be very nice.
Have to change weather service.
It's supposed to be 22 tomorrow.
Really?
We just got, we have 3 younger kids, and we had gotten a above ground pool for this season, and we had it out we just set it up, and they were in it all last weekend, or 2 weekends ago when it was super hot. It has no heat, like it's just holy water.
Oh, really?
With chemicals in it, the filter and stuff, and they're all talking about, we're gonna spend all day by the pool. I'm like, you're gonna freeze, but you're 9. So.
Yeah. They don't care.
They don't care.
If there's not steam coming off the water, I don't get into it.
Well, for my 50th birthday, I got a hot tub,
Oh, you did?
and I'm in it every night, and the kids are in it too.
So you're getting it in 2 years?
No, I got it. I have a hot tub. Oh,
You missed that.
yeah. I'm getting it 2 years. I don't get it.
Well, you're not. How could you be 50? You're 2 years. You're not.
Oh, right.
50.
No, I'm 50. I'm almost 51. But it's the best thing I've ever purchased. I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
we
We have
a
one.
bill, so.
We have one. It came with the house. I doubt I would have ever bought one, but it came with
Do
the
you use
house. The kids and my wife use it a lot. I've been in it a couple of times.
Yeah, my wife's not in the hot tub, but the kids really like it, and I like it because there's no devices are allowed, and we just sit and talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, every night we have a soak. It's like old Jewish men in Schwitz,
Yeah.
except for they're my kids.
I missed that about the Richmond Country Club.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember? Did you go out there?
No, I never did. They offered me membership, all the rabbis.
The rabbis. I go there. I sit. I use this. I do the Jewish triathlon.
Uh-huh.
The steam, the sauna, the whirlpool. That's what.
It's funny.
I think they're close. I think.
You got one person watching.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Good.
2 people watching.
Will it be recorded and
Yeah.
so I can send it out to others after.
Well, I've been here doing all this work for the last 20-some odd years, so.
Have you been to the cemetery before?
No, first time. I don't think that. very beautiful.
Yeah, I've never, I mean, I've been the rabbi now for 8 years here, but I've never seen a cemetery like this anywhere in the world. It's
Really?
unbelievable.
That's very, like, yeah, when you hear birds chirping, it shows it's very peaceful spot.
Yeah. Generally, if you're up there, you hear weed whackers. They seem to be always working on the cemetery across the street whenever we have a funeral.
No, I thought it was a good spot because it's also Joe's been in the States lots. And
Right.
so it's like,
So you're closer.
as close as you can, you know.
Right, as close as you can
maintain your
get.
Canadian, you know. roots.
If you had bought plots and buried them in Victoria, you would have
Oh
been
yeah,
below the 49.
you're right. That's a good point.
I mean, it's still Canada, but
You're right.
you're
Below the
below the
49th.
49th.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's about right. I remember the day.
One of my targets at a house in Santa Cortez or whatever it is. Anna Cortez?
Oh, Anacortes.
Anna Cortez. He was explaining to me how, because you can't drive, they're not Americans, so in order to get over the border, they can't drive over the border. So they bring their car down to the border, put it on a flatbed, and then go to, there's some small regional airport right before the border somewhere.
Oh, well, there's one right at Point Robert. Not
Yeah.
Point Robert, at the Blaine.
Right.
There is
No, on our side of the border, there's some small airport.
Oh, Boundary Bay?
Yeah, you go to Boundary Bay, get on a small airplane, fly into Bellingham. It's like a 6-minute flight. Call the guy who's got their car on a flatbed truck, say, okay, we've landed. Then that guy can bring, because he's essential service, can bring the car over the border, and then they get their car.
But once they fly in, aren't they subject to quarantine and stuff?
Not in the United States. There's no quarantine.
Oh, okay.
Coming back, they will. They're going to spend the next 6 weeks down.
But they can't just drive across.
No, you can't, because they're not.
Oh, okay.
Well, although I don't know. I guess they're not letting Canadians into the United States.
Yeah, it's tougher.
It's a little more than
With
6 minutes.
There's more freedoms in the States than there are here.
Right.
More likely with leaving
But
them.
I mean, you're a U.S. citizen, right?
I'm Canadian. I'm
You're
like,
Canadian.
No, I can't.
Because we're going to drive over in July.
Should be okay. Like, there are even restrictions. Hopefully, on Tuesday. Should be on Tuesday.
I don't think they're going to change the borders.
But you're right. No, I think that's going to be a minimum for that.
Yeah. My guess is.
But you're allowed to go in the States. Pretty easy, but just coming back here after quarantine.
Right.
Money-
Right. And I'm a dual citizen now.
Oh, there you go.
Hi guys, I'm Rabbi Dean.
I'm John.
Guys, let me give you this now.
What is his favorite soup? So I figured I'd break it.
I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to go over here.
All right, that's fine. I'll do that. It's supposed to go on so over here. That's fine.
And then in a moment, we'll take that. Is this everybody?
This is everything.
So, you know, you can't start a funeral by saying good afternoon, but it is a beautiful afternoon. It's necessary for us to be here, so we're going to do our best to make this a celebration of Joe's life. As bizarre as this is to do it in the midst of a pandemic with only these two people here. But I thank you for being here. I just want to go over a couple of protocols with you if I can. If you didn't come in the same car with the person that's in the car standing next to you, please don't stand next to them. It's supposed to provide 2 meters or 6 feet of separation. We keep our masks on unless you're speaking. We are going to do the service here, and we're streaming it on the internet. There are a few people already watching it. It'll be brief, but if anybody wants to say anything, I've prepared some remarks, but if anybody would like to offer memories or stories, please feel free to do so, and I'll create an opportunity to do that. Right now, however, though, I'm going to need some help to lift the casket to the graveside. We need preferably 6 people to strong back. We can do it with 4, but 6 is best. three on each side. No, it doesn't matter. Just, we're just going to walk around the tree and come up here.
Test.
Take one and pass it over. Sure. Would you like a yarmulke? Yeah. Do you want a yarmulke? Dad. Here you go. Thank you, Howard. Shalom. May I and Yahweh Ezri, Esainai, Hecharim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri, Me'im Adonai, Osei, Shemayim Varetz, Ezri, Me'im Adonai, Osei, Shemayim Varetz. I lift my eyes up to the mountains, and what is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, the maker of heaven and earth. You're all spread out very nicely from each other, but I also feel like you're awfully far away. You're welcome to come closer, and Maria, please feel free to come closer as well. So Jewish tradition commands us to do this, to come and be the final hands that carry our loved one to their final rest. It's a mitzvah that's commanded upon every Jew. And Joe knew that. Joe made these arrangements well in advance, knowing that he would need a place, and he would want a place that he could be with Maria, God willing, 120 years from now, for the rest of their lives. And so he did everything that he could, but there is one part that he can't do, and that's to be those gentle hands that carry to the final rest. And so it's our mitzvah, it's our sacred obligation to do this for him, for our friend, for our father, for our husband. It's a sacred duty. Beyond that, we also are obligated to draw lessons from his life, to connect his life and how he lived it with how we will live our own going forward. Our tradition teaches that when a person dies, their soul goes up to heaven to help God run the world. We can think for a moment what Joe would be telling God about how to run the world. I think I've already had that conversation. And as I was sharing on the phone the other day, it's a very comforting image. It's the one that many of us grew up with, of a heaven and all of these things. And it may very well be exactly what happens. I don't know. What I do know for sure, because I have seen it again and again for decades, is that when a person dies, they do not leave this world. They live on in the people that remember them. They continue to be a part of the life of this family and this circle of friends. Every time you tell a story, every time you invoke their memory, every time you gather and you talk about how Joe would have seen or experienced this particular thing, and every time you interact with another person or with the world or even with yourself in a way that he would have been proud, or a way that he taught you, or a way he would have disapproved of and told you as well. That's how a person lives on. And so we say in Judaism, when somebody dies, may their memory be a blessing, and that's what we mean. That he could continue to guide and to teach, and he was an incredible teacher. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but he taught so many, and he will continue to teach by the memory of his example. I wanted to share a few psalms with you. Our tradition teaches that we should turn to the ancient writings of King David to draw from those lessons, those journal entries of King David, lessons for our present circumstance. Even though they were written 2,000 plus years ago, there is still relevance and connection for us today. One of them is on your sheet. I'll read that in a moment, but another one is not on your sheet, and I want to share it with you. It's Psalm 15. It's not as familiar as the 23rd Psalm that we'll read in a moment, but its teaching, I think, is profound, and I think it speaks to the man that I got to know in our few interactions and the caliber of his character. Adonai mi yagur bo'chalecha mi yishkan b'har kodshecha. God, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain, who at the end of their life, David is asking, gets to go to heaven, who is measured for reward and merit. And then King David writes a list of the qualities of such a person, and listen to who King David thinks is worthy of such reward. Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless, but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may do not retract it, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken and shall dwell on God's holy mountain. Everything you have told me about Joe and everything I've come to know of him from my own interactions and speaking with Rabbi Bregman and others in the congregation that knew him, he embodies those words of King David. He was a man of integrity,
a man of honesty. He didn't only speak truth in his heart, he spoke it out loud to others as well. But he was fiercely dedicated to his work and to the people that he helped in his work and to all of you. He was upright. He did justly. I pray that he merits the measure of the reward as our tradition prescribes. Let's read together on your handout Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. L'kol zman b'eit l'kol chefetz tachat hashemayim, to everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And so there's a silence in our lives now. A void has been created and we fill it with story. We fill it, as we've said, with memory. Before I share a few thoughts about Joe, did anybody want to share anything? Or it doesn't have to be formal, it doesn't have to be prepared. Is there a lesson from life that you learned from him that maybe we could all learn from?
But it's a funny story.
It's okay.
And I think maybe all my relatives have heard it, but I come up here.
Yeah, you can take your mask off.
And Luma and Mark, I'm wearing this
Come
suit.
a little closer.
Yeah, Luma and Mark, I'm wearing this suit because this was Joe's favorite suit, so it's not in the traditional black. A lot of people always ask me over the years, I think including Natasha.
Maria, you can take your mask off.
Oh, okay. Including Natasha, why did I marry Joe? So I always, and a lot of people have asked me that over the years, so I always tell them this tale. Back in September of 1978, Joe and I went to the Muhammad Ali Sphinx fight in New Orleans, and it was, it was a huge event, and all the glitterati were there. And we were up in the nosebleed section, and so we had our binoculars, and we had our binoculars trained on the gate that brought in all the celebrities, and where Muhammad Ali and Sphinx would come in. And all the people around us, they were yelling, giving tips. Hey, there's Cary Grant, and we'd all train our binoculars onto, and look at Cary Grant with his white hair. Hey, there's Jacqueline Onassis, John Travolta, Ted Kennedy. And then suddenly I hear this voice next to me. Hey, there's Joe Litner. And everyone trained, trained the binoculars on the gate. I thought this was so unusual that a year later I married him.
Anybody else want to share? It's okay to laugh, Remember with a smile. So I've been a rabbi now for almost 25 years. And one of the things that I've learned in that time is that so often I meet the most interesting people at the end of their life. And I didn't get a chance to get to know them because of that. I only get to know them through the stories of others. That's almost true with Joe. I only got to know him in this last year or so. He'd been a member for a long time. We'd met a couple of times over the years that I've been here. I remember him sitting in my office. I asked him for money once for the synagogue. I think he said yes. We're going to say he said yes. But last year at the High Holy Days, I gave a High Holiday sermon that he didn't like. I felt really bad about that. Then I talked to Rabbi Bregman and said, Rabbi Bregman said, every year I gave a High Holiday sermon that Joe didn't like. And he would tell me. And Rabbi Bregman said, Joe would come up to me and say, I'm never coming into this synagogue again. I can't stand that sermon. To which Rabbi Bregman said, he would say, Joe, you only come once a year. You're going to forget the sermon between now and next year. You'll be back. And he was. But Joe didn't like my sermon, but he had the courage to talk to me about it. And I know courage was not something that Joe was ever lacking.
No.
And I had the humility and the good sense to listen. And I learned a lot from him. Didn't change my mind about my perspective on the topic of my sermon. But he informed me a lot. And he was worried that he was going to come off and I was going to think of him as some crazy right-winger or whatever it was. And it was just the opposite. That I found him to be, from his life experience and the stories he told me of his time in New Orleans and of working with the African American community and the students that he raised up and the real life experience he had had during Katrina and in working in the military and in all of the situations that he dealt with there in New Orleans, that he really understood the community that I was speaking about, and that his perspective and his insight came from a place of experience and lived knowledge. And that he was sharing this with me to try to teach me, to try to make me a better rabbi. And he didn't quite say that, and I didn't quite realize that at first, but afterwards I did. And he left the synagogue over it. He came back, but he actually left this time. I felt like, oh my gosh. Bregman, he just threatened me, he did. But we stayed in contact, and he kept sending me stuff, and he thought I would never read it. And I read everything he sent, and some of it was voluminous, and I get a lot of email. And he sent me this story that you sent me, the document that you sent me. That was written to me. That was a letter to me. I don't know if you know that. If you read to the end, it says, I feel like I've read this before.
Yeah, I know.
To reiterate, due to my cancer diagnosis and ongoing immunotherapy, I'll retire at the end of 2020. I've documented this history of my medical career at the request of my children. Of necessity, this only includes some of the highlights. I share this with you, this is written to me, and trust that you will resist the temptation to simply write me off as a right-wing zealot. He was so right. And he was so good. What a mensch. What a contribution this man made, not only to the medical field, but to humanity. To put himself into some of the most challenging positions, to bring his skills of organization, I really think of empathy and of medicine and of science, and to be able to bring all of those things together. He talks about the visit of the Pope and how he then had to reach out to the National Guard in New Orleans because he's way in over his head. To even admit that he's over his head at some point is not an easy thing for anyone to do. And then to have pulled it off in such a way that the 100 people that they thought were going to die didn't. I just came away from that story and those interactions with such an appreciation for his love of Israel, for his love of being a Jew, the pride that he had. And then as you told me, Maria, he was a sensitive person too. And I loved the story you said about how you guys went to Newfoundland and Anne of Green Gables, and he was a puddle. Right? You don't think of Joe Litner as the puddle kind of guy, but he was. He could get very emotional. He would get emotional at military ceremonies and at other kinds of life transition ceremonies.
Sporting event.
Sporting event.
Sporting events. You get emotional.
National anthem.
National anthem.
National anthem.
Oh,
that makes sense. That speaks to the character of a person also. It speaks to the quality of their soul, that they are not just what they project. They're not just the right-wing zealot that he thought somebody might think. But that there's a real neshama, a real soul inside of there, and of course there was. He had an incredible drive, a tremendous work ethic, high expectations for all of you, and high expectations for himself, and he met them. You didn't have to be the most successful person in the world, you just had to try hard. You had to give your all and do your best at it. And he gave you credit for that. It was the journey, not the destination. It was the effort, not the outcome. So you all know his biography. You shared it with me. I'm not going to go through all of that. You know it better than I do. But his early connection in the Canadian Armed Forces and the Air Force, I think, gave him entree into the American military in such a way that he was able to bridge his medical life and the experience as an emergency room doctor and specialist into that military apparatus that is so often, sort of a black box trying to navigate. And two countries are better for that. Canada, for sure, benefited, but so did the United States. And now, being a citizen of both, I just became a Canadian citizen about a month or two ago, I can really appreciate what he contributed. I asked you what his values and his creed were. He wanted the best for his family. He wanted people to take responsibility for their actions. As I mentioned, a hard work ethic, a terrific work ethic. He hated it when people made excuses for their own behavior. And he was loyal, tremendous loyalty. That was important to him. As I mentioned, he was a proud Jew, a devout Zionist. A strong supporter of Israel this last week would have torn him up, tore all of us up. After his father died, he focused on Judaism, on his Judaism. He didn't go to synagogue much, but he was proud to be a Jew. The rabbis tell a story in the Talmud about a rabbi named Zusia. Zusia is also a teacher with many students. And one day, Zusia's students come into the Beit Midrash, to the house of study, and they see that Zusia is crying at his study table. And they go up to him to kind of console him, and they think something must have happened in Zusia's life. God forbid somebody was sick or died. And said, Zusia, why are you crying? And Zusia said, I just realized what God is going to ask me when I die. And they said, Zusia, what are you worried about? That you're a scholar, you're a Talmid Chacham, a brilliant student, a teacher of Torah, a rabbi, a tzaddik, a righteous person. What are you worried that God's going to ask you? He said, I just learned that God is not going to ask me, Zusia, why weren't you more like Moses, who led the people out of Egypt and into freedom? So what are you worried about? And I learned that God is not going to ask me, Zusia, why weren't you more like Joshua, who settled the land, coming over the Jordan and became biblical Israel? And they said, so Zusia, why are you crying? And Zusia says, because I've learned that God was going to ask me, Zusia, why weren't you more like Zusia? Joe doesn't have to worry about that question. God has no doubt, we have no doubt, that Joe was exactly the person that he intended to be his entire life. And I think God's going to ask the question. God's going to ask God's self the question, God, why didn't you make more like this? Why didn't you make more of them like this one? Because the world was better for it. May his memory be a blessing. Amen. The prayer that we say at this time is called El Malei Rachamim. It means God who is full of compassion. It's not on your sheet. We'll get to one more on your sheet in a moment. Everybody's always looking at their piece of paper. But I'm going to chant this prayer and just sit down and make sure I have the right piece of paper in front of me.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Amitzehem Mincha Nechona, Tachat Kanfecha Shechina, Im Kiroshim Utechorim, Kizochar Akim Asirim, Et Nishmat Yosef ben David, Shechalal Olamo, Baal harachamim, yastirechu, besetek nafav lolamim, vayitzror chachayim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Joe, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence in the shadow of your wings. And let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And we say together, Amen.
Amen.
When I die, if you need to weep, cry for someone walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around others and give them what you need from me. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands and souls touch souls. You can love me most by sharing your joys, multiplying your good deeds. You can love me most by letting me live in your eyes and not in your mind. And when you say Kaddish for me, remember what our Torah teaches. Love doesn't die. People do. So when all that is left of me is love, give me away. The Kaddish prayer is on the other side of that sheet. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah v'yomad yivrach yeruteh v'yamlich malchuteh v'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael v'agala u'bizman kariv v'yimaru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh v'yit adar v'yit aleh v'yit alal shemei dekudesha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damin ran be'alma v'yimaru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yalkol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. Oseh shalom b'romav Huya aseh shalom aleinu v'yalkol Yisrael v'kol yoshvei tevel v'yimaru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort the bereaved. Comfort this family, and we say together, Amen. So friends, we're going to now fulfill that final mitzvah and be the gentle hands that tuck Joe in, to pull the cover's earth around him, to make sure that he's given a proper Jewish burial. So I'm going to ask you to come forward, if you would, one at a time. There are shovels on both sides of the mound. Jewish tradition has it that the first shovel that you place of earth, we actually turn the shovel upside down, so the cove side is up, to show that we're not doing normal shoveling, that this is a holy act. And then after that, the next shovels of earth can be used as a normal shovel would be used. Tradition is to do 3 shovels. 3 is a Jewish number, it shows intention. And then to actually return the shovel to the mound so that each person can take it up in their own hand to fulfill the mitzvah. After we've done that sort of symbolically, then those that are able to, it's our custom to fully cover the casket with earth, so we'll have some additional shoveling to do. Please, if you would. The pieces of paper that you have in front of you, one other thing, those are called shemot. They're pages that have God's name on them, so we can't throw them away. Tradition would be to bury them, and we would bury them in a cemetery. So because of COVID and because they're pieces of paper with God's name on it, we're actually going to place them in the grave. So as you come forward for the shoveling, we'll surround Joe with words of Torah as well. Okay? Thank you.
You first?
Yeah.
So the first one is
Upside down. Yep. And then north.
You're supposed to do 3?
Yeah,
no?
one more. Oh, one more.
2.
3.
3.
We put it back in the mound so people have to bend down just a little bit. Thank you.
there's something poetic about you shuffling in that I thought he did. He like circles it. This is what
Just let it fall. It's okay.
Oh, from red line. Okay.
Guys, if you're able to help, we need to fully cover the casket.
All right.
And use both sides. those that are wearing the black ribbon, if I could ask you to tear the ribbon and we'll say a blessing. It tears easily from the bottom up. And if you repeat after me, Adonai Natan,
Adonai Natan,
Adonai Lakach,
Adonai Lakach,
Baruch Shem,
Baruch Shem,
Adonai Mivorach,
Adonai Nevarach,
Baruch Dayan,
Baruch Adonai,
HaEmet.
Amen.
Eternal God has given, and in wisdom beyond our understanding, God has taken away. Blessed be God's glorious name forever and ever. Blessed be the Judge of truth. Amen. May his memory be a blessing. This concludes our service this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.